Oh, ominous.
This is the
Miss
largest
Verlyle will know what this is
Soulcore
about.
I've ever seen. With this, we could probably...
Not today!
still late. Maybe the cons. Oh dear. Now we just have to remove it from that giant construct. Good luck.
Hi, so welcome to the second version or the optimized version for the Lightning Witchhunter crit build that I've made. So this build again specializes in using only arrow-based builds, so it doesn't use any grenade skills or whatsoever. So the main changes that I've made compared to the previous guide that I've made is that I've decided to switch the lightning build into a crit focus build instead of an ailment focus build, and I found that the crit build performs significantly better for boss fights and wave clearing in general. And I guess based on the feedback from the previous guide that I've made, a lot of people seem to have interest in having a written guide. So I've decided to write everything that I know about PoE2 and I guess the build I'm trying to make on mobileanalytics.gg. And the link to this guide should be available on the description of this video, or if not, on the comments. So what are the main changes compared to the status build that I've built, or the ailment focus build from my previous guide? So the reason why I've decided to do a crit focus build is mainly because the way that electrocute works at PoE is that let me just open up the skill gem. Is that the shock the shock debuff chance that you apply to enemy is dependent on how much lightning damage is dealt, right? So I'm not too sure about the exact calculation, but I believe that basically the higher damage numbers you can output, the better chance you can apply shock debuff to the enemy. So what I originally thought from my previous build guide is that if I decide to open up all of the increased chance to inflict ailment effects, this would automatically lead to increased shock chance, right? While this is true, I think after some experimentation, I believe projectile damage does perform significantly better, because again, the more damage you output to the enemies, the higher chance you have on applying shock damage, right? So not only do you get the added bonus of applying shock damage, the applying chance of shock, you also apply more damage to the enemies, right? So it's a win-win scenario as well. So just starting off with the equipment section. Now I think I've put on a disclaimer here that I'm not gonna put, what kind of suffix or prefix you should aim in each gear, because again, everyone has a random chance on getting their gear, and then you might get a low roll, you might get a high roll. It really depends on individual person. But I think what I've made here are basically just lists of prefix and suffix that you should try to aim for, that are quite important to make the build work, right? So just starting off with the weapons. So for the crossbow, I think since this is a crit build, what you want is to increase the critical chance, right? So higher crit numbers means obviously more damage, and more damage means you can apply shock more often. So one of the first stats you should try to aim for is the increase in the critical hit chance. So I don't mean the critical hit chance in percentage, but what I meant is the 2 critical hit chance. So this essentially helps increase the base number of the critical hit chance, and this base number is what's going to be used when you have other crit chance prefix, like increased critical hit chance. So increasing the base number of your critical hit chance in your weapon is very important. So other than the 2 critical hit chance prefix buff prefix that you should have on your weapon, I think the other ones that are obviously would help boost your numbers are just the physical damage to attacks. So any of the flat stat, like add certain number of physical damage, or the percentage number of physical damage would obviously help with the physical damage on your weapon, and then this physical damage is what's going to be used for your skills. Now, for the chest and the amulet piece, since we are planning to use multiple spirit skills, these are basically the only two ways that I know or I'm aware on how to increase your spirit cap. So on what you should aim for on your chest piece, but also your amulet, is to increase the spirit. So if you look at my own gear, for example, I have about plus 52 spirits and then about plus 46 spirits on my amulet and body armor. I think I put in my gut somewhere that you should have at least about 60 spirits. So this should be the minimum amount of spirit that is required to equip at least 2 of the Herald's spirit skills, so Herald of Ash and Herald of Thunder. But then I think ideally you would want to try to get at least 90 spirits. So this allows you to equip 3 of the spirit skills. So the third one I'm talking about is the overwhelming presence, but more on that on the skill section later on. Now, I think for the boots, what you should always try to have is also increased movement speed. So this is not specific to the build, but I think just having more movement speed is always nice. It just makes wave clearing a lot faster, and then I think you can feel the difference for certain boss fights where you do have to run around the area to avoid certain attacks, and just having that movement speed is really nice. It's just really nice quality to have on your build. So for the other slots like gloves, belts, rings, and helmets, I think what you should always try to prioritize again is defensive stats. So since Mercenary is a character that scales with strength and dexterity in terms of defensive stat, you should always have a good amount of armor and evasion. And I guess like from my own personal benchmark, every time I try to upgrade my whole gear set, I think I would try to aim to have at least 35% for both stats. And then obviously you also want resistance, as much resistance as possible, because every time you progress to the next act, you're gonna get the -10 resistant debuff basically, and then you should try to at least again to have 35% for each act that you progress. And once you have enough spirit, so I know that the benchmark that I use is about 90 spirits, but I have about 128, and I guess the reason why I have a bit more spirits is because I wanted to equip some of the support gems that basically took additional spirit reservations, which is vitality and precision, but this is more of an optional thing and nice to have. And again, maximum HP is always nice to have in any gear, just to boost your survivability so you don't get one-shotted with. Now, in terms of skill gem, I did quickly mention that I use 3 spirit skills, so 3 buff skills. Now, if you're starting as a new player, and then I think in the middle of Act 1, you can choose your first spirit skill, I would recommend getting Herald of Thunder, mainly because again, this is more a lightning focused build. And Herald of Thunder basically just helps with some of the AoEs whenever you kill an enemy with shock debuffs. And then the gems, the support gems that I've used are Lightning Mastery, so this just increased the level of Herald of Thunder by 1, and I also have Maim and Blind just for additional debuff for the enemy. And then for the second spirit skill that I always recommend is always Herald of Ash. This is a really good spirit skill to have just for additional AoE clearing. So basically every time an enemy dies and you do overkill damage, basically this overkill damage becomes an explosive AoE that also damages other enemies. And then I use Magnified Effect and Concentrated Effect just to increase the damage and area. And then I also have Fire Mastery just to increase the level of Herald of Ash by 1. Now the third spirit skill, which is you should try to aim for, but you don't really need, is Overwhelming Presence. So the way that Overwhelming Presence works is that it applies an AoE debuff around you to the enemies, and this essentially makes it easier to apply ailment such as shock, but also helps build up electrocute easier. So it's really nice to have, and I think if you have the opportunity to have more than 90 spirits, you should always equip Overwhelming Presence as your third spirit skill. For the support gems, you don't really need this. I just have these mainly because I have enough spirits to equip them, but this is just more of a nice to have. So Vitality just helps give you some life per second regen, so some passive regen, so you don't have to rely much on your I guess your healing potion, but also Precision also helps increase some of your accuracy as well. Now, the three main damage skills for this build is Galvanic Shard, Shock Burst Rounds, and also Plasma Blast. Now, for people who, I guess, like pre-level 52, so before you unlock the Plasma Blast, which is the last tier, this build works perfectly fine with just high velocity rounds. So this is actually what I've been using the entire time before I unlock Plasma Blast. And the good thing is that you can equip the same support gem for high velocity rounds for Plasma Blast. So just use this if you haven't unlocked Plasma Blast. But anyway, so Galvanic Shard is mainly there as a AoE clear. This is a very good, I guess, like shotgun spell just to wave clear all of the trash mobs that comes to you. And the support that I use is just close combat, so deal more damage to people who are closer. Primal Ornament, just increase more elemental damage. And also Electrocute. So Electrocute will play a big role in, I guess, improving your survivability in maps. I think when I did campaign, one of my biggest problem with map clearing is that all of the trash mobs will eventually surround you if you don't kill them fast enough. And then, if you can't roll away because you're being body blocked by those enemies, this Electrocute is there to basically save you. So what Electrocute does is that once you build up enough Electrocute debuff on the enemy, they basically will get stunned for 5 seconds. And then for normal enemies and also I guess magic enemies, so the one with the blue text, you can Electrocute very quickly. It usually only takes about 2-3 shots to fully electrocute them, and then it just makes the whole wave clearing or like map clearing safer. Now, Shock Burst Round is something that you would use for bosses, but also for rarer enemies that are tankier, right? So I wouldn't recommend using Galvanic Shard for bosses or tougher enemies. So that's where Shock Burst Round is for, right? So I think the way that Shock Burst Round works is that this skill only really does damage, like good amount of damage, if the enemy basically has a lightning ailment debuff. So lightning ailment is just any shock or electrocute or both. So as long as you have one of these debuff on the enemy, the shock burst rounds will essentially do an additional AoE damage, and this AoE damage does a significant amount of damage. And I think you've seen it by now for the boss fight that I've made earlier in the video as well. So the support gem that I use are just elemental focus. So since I don't really care about putting elemental ailments on shock burst round, since we're gonna use the other spells to help inflict ailments, I just care about the increased elemental damage. That's why I put elemental focus. Martial tempo really helps with just finishing your entire magazine essentially. And then lightning penetration is also there to for more damage. And then plasma blast is something that you would use basically before the boss starts. Usually when boss spawns, they have like 5-second phase where they're just walking around and then using their dialogues. So since plasma blast has about 2 seconds load time before you can actually shoot it, this is something that you would use to preload it, and then the moment the boss HP begins, you will shoot your plasma blast. Now plasma blast is again mainly for bosses. I wouldn't really recommend using this for map clearing in general, because again there are so many enemies and being stationary for 2 seconds can usually make a big difference, and that's not accounting for any stuns as well. So scatter shot, very good support buff skill. Because again, plasma blast takes about 2 seconds just to shoot one, but then if you can just shoot 2 additional projectiles along with it, you can basically shoot 3 times in one go, right? And I don't know if since it's not written in this website, plasma blast also has an increased chance to shock. So this is basically your primary way to inflict shock in bosses, right? And then that's basically after you apply shock, that's basically when you're gonna start using shock burst round as well. And then inevitable critical and ambush are just there for an increased crit. Since we're not going to be using plasma blast often, I guess we want to make it count, so that that's why we have critical, just to make sure that when we do use plasma blast on bosses, you can deal as much damage as possible, right? And every time you use this is about 10 till 20% of the HP of the boss gone already. Now emergency reload is a really good support skill. I don't mean by support gem, but I mean just as a skill in general. So the way that emergency reload works is that it instantly reloads your magazine or like your ammunition, and then the loaded bolts essentially also deals more damage, right? Now, I put the ingenuity, so just to increase the cooldown recovery rate, but also I put premeditation just to make the support skill deal more damage, right? So the way that you would use emergency reload is mainly for bosses, or I guess like for wave clearing, right? Let's say you have too much enemies coming and then you don't have enough ammo for galvanic shard, you can always use emergency reload to reload the ammo. But ideally what you want to use emergency reload is to reload your shock burst round. So the main rotation, which I would explain later on, is basically just use plasma blast to apply shock as a starting rotation for the boss, and then you would basically empty your first clip for shock burst round, and then immediately use emergency reload to reload your shock burst round, and then basically do a second clip just bursting down the boss, and then it should almost kill the boss by now. Now, Voltaic Mark is there just as a support skill as well. Maybe it's for some bosses who are tankier, or maybe some rare enemies that have high elemental resistance. This basically helps just to ensure that you can apply shock easier. So I put persistence here just for increased skill duration. I put conduction just to again put more shock, more chance to shock, and excise is there just to I guess help the spell crit more often. I'm not actually too sure if this works, but yeah, I just put there just in case it does. So again, high velocity rounds is just there for people who don't have access to plasma blast yet, but the whole rotation still works the same. Now moving on to the passive tree. So I guess like the way that I've built my character is that there are two stages, right? So if you decide to do any, I guess like shooting builds in general, regardless if you want to do lightning, fire, or ice, or even like full physical critical, I think there are some inherent issues with mercenary in general, and there are some things that you would always want to have in your build first before you focus on lightning or any specific builds. So what I'm talking about is that when you start the build, basically you can start with the increased projectile damage, and then you go down here to get remorseless, and then get some nice defensive stats from these two nodes. And then you would go down first to get ricochet, and then clear space is actually in my opinion quite an underrated node. It really helps push back some of the, I guess, like trash mobs so you don't get surrounded. And then I guess like more importantly, what you always want to have is your adrenaline rush. Again, increased movement speed is very nice, but increased attack speed is also nice, just to make you shoot faster, right, with all of your skill. And then afterwards you want to go here to instant reload. Now again, reload speed is very nice. I think without any reload speed buff at all on your character, or any reload speed modifier, it takes a while for your character to reload to any ammo type, right? And having that crossbow reload speed here just really helps with your overall DPS in general. So after you get this, you can try to go down here, and then the next node you should aim for is reusable ammunition. Just again, that not be able to consume ammo helps boost your DPS because you don't have to I guess like reload as often. And then full salvo is always nice because I think from the clip that I've shown earlier in the video, I think whether you're wave clearing or doing bosses, you're gonna switch ammo types quite often, and then having that increased damage is always nice. So after you have this, and I guess like the last one is also Giant Slayer just for more boss damage. After you have all the necessary I guess shooting nodes, the next thing you want to prioritize is your lightning and crit based nodes, right? So I think by this point you should be around level 40, and ideally between Act 3 and Act 4 in the campaign. So after you have this, you can just go back here and get the dispatch foes just to increase the critical chance. And then you can also go here to get the lightning damage node with non-critical hits as lucky. Now, you might think this is a bit contradictory, mainly because we're doing a crit build, but then again, we don't have a 100% crit chance. And then for, I guess, like the shots that do not hit crits, you want to be lucky so that you can reroll the highest number. Flash Storm is always nice because it increase the chance to shock, but also more importantly penetrates 50% lightning resistance, and then Force of Nature also penetrates 50% elemental resistance. And then you also can go here for the critical, just to have more critical chance and critical damage, and then here afterwards you want to finish the tree with power shots to increase the critical damage as well. And after you have all of this, I think the next step to go is go over here just to again get the movement speed and the skill speed, so you can shoot faster and reload faster as well. And then I guess like the major notes that you want to aim for first here is to get more critical hit chance, and then get more critical hit chance, and then more critical damage, and then just basically get any lightning, or I guess like lightning based notes like this one here. Or and you can also go here, since we are using multiple heralds, this would also help increase boost our damage. Now, after this, it's basically up to you on what else you want to upgrade in your skill. So, you can go here as well to apply more shock, for example, or you can maybe go to the left here and get more evasion or more survivability if you're having trouble surviving in maps in general. It's really up to you. But I guess like for now, I'm still building within this area, so I will update the build once I've reached later stage of the game. So for Ascendancy as well, I guess like the first 4 points that you should always aim for is this one that unlocks Culling Strike, but this one that unlocks Decimating Strike as well. This is 2 very helpful skill, and I guess like for people who don't really know what these are, if I open up my skill tree, so Culling Strike basically just means that you kill enemies instantly if they reach a certain HP threshold. So for normal enemies, it's about 30%, magic is about 28, rare is about 10, and bosses are 5%. And then Decimating Strike is basically when the first time you hit an enemy, you have I guess it will damage between 5 till 30% of the HP directly. So this is a very, very good combo to have, I guess, as a starter. Because I guess like what most people don't realize is that, let's say assuming you hit 30% on, let's say, normal enemies, since normal enemies die below 30%, this basically means that you only need to damage 40% of the enemy HP before they die. And this is really great at bursting small enemies, but it's also really good at boss stage as well. So after you have this, I guess like the third ascendancy that you should try to aim for is just the Zealous Inquisition. So this just basically gives another way to explode enemies, really good for more AoE clearing and faster AoE clearing. And I guess like the fourth one that you can put into, I guess what I recommend is just Obsessive Ritual, maybe just to have that sorcery ward to give you a bit more survivability in the end game, or you can just go for more Witchbane, just for more damage in general. Now for jewels as well. So if you follow my build, there are actually I guess like a couple of jewel slots that you'll unlock eventually. So if I just open up my skill tree, for example, I have unlocked about 1, 2, 3, and 4 jewel slots. So what kind of jewel slots are you trying to aim for? So I guess from my perspective, there are basically 3 stats that you should try to aim for in terms of jewel. So you should always get a combination of either shock duration, increased magnitude of shock, or increased critical hit chance, right? Since we are doing a crit build. Now, I think as an example here, I guess the perfect jewel is to have all 3 of them, but I'm just being mindful that not everyone might be lucky enough or might have the currency to buy this, right? So again, you have increased shock duration, increased critical hit chance, and also increased magnitude. So increased magnitude is there just to increase the damage modifier of shock. So I guess the base debuff for shock is about 20%, but with the with the increased magnitude of shock that I have on a couple of gems, I think my percentage value is about 26%. So it means I deal 26% more damage to enemies, right? And I guess like very importantly, you should always have increased shock duration. I think this from all 3 options, increased shock duration is the most important, mainly because it can be quite difficult to apply shock to, let's say, bosses, for example. So the moment you do apply shock, you want it to last as long as possible, so you have a bigger window to do your DPS, right? And then I guess the third one that's always nice to have is just increased critical hit chance, mainly because again, being able to boost your critical hit chance. So if I look at Galvanic Shot, for example, my critical hit chance right now is about 30%, right? But if I take one of the gems out, it's gonna decrease by 1 or 2%. So try to aim for a combination of all these 3 stats on your jewels. But yeah, so aim to have at least 2 of them. Now, I guess given that we've used quite a lot of support gems and a lot of skills as well, this usually comes with quite a heavy stat requirement. So you can even see that I've used about 4 strength gems, 10 dexterity, and 8 int, right? And then in total, I'm the level 62, and this is basically the minimum amount of stat that I need. So 126 strength, 131 dexterity, and 42 intelligence just to make my build work. Not my build work, but I guess like to optimize it completely, right? So if you do have problems with, I guess like not being able to get the correct gear that helps with stats attribute, you can always go back down here to increase your stat. And there are some major notes here, like let's say increase attributes that really helps boost your attributes. But if you really need I guess like if you're still having trouble, there's also like the options here to reduce equipment and skill gems, reduce attribute requirement. So this is completely optional, but you can do it as well if you, I guess, don't have the correct gear for it. Now, so just the last part of the guide is just how it plays. Now, there are basically 3 rotations that you want to do. So for AoE clearing, what you want to do is just use your galvanic shard. So very simple. Just press for me right click here and then it shoot down enemies. And then the way that it works is that there are multiple factors that makes it clear very very quickly, but also very safely, right? So galvanic shard again applies shock. But also, since we are using electrocute gem, it also has a build up for electrocute, right? So we have both electrocute and shock. So increased damage and 5 seconds stun as well on the enemy. And when they die from, let's say, because of our calling strike, because of our ascendancy, right? We basically will always trigger the Herald of Ash spirit buff, and also the Herald of Thunder spirit skill, right? So these 2 AoE skills really help clear mobs really quickly. But once you've unlocked the Zealous Inquisition, it's also gonna help you clear even faster, right? So it's just another layer of AoE. Now for tankier enemies, so I think when you do maps in general, you're bound to see rare enemies, and you can't really necessarily burst them down very easily, right? So if you see a rare enemies, you should try to use your galvanic shard still to try to at least either land a shock or electrocute. And once the enemy has that debuff on, this is basically when you want to switch to your shock burst round, and basically burst the enemy down. I think if you do the build properly, you should be able to burst the enemy down in one shock or electrocute debuff window. And I guess like if you're having trouble applying shock or electrocute, just use your voltaic mark, which is basically one of your mark skills, just to help build up those electrocute buff or just the increased shock chance. And then I guess for bosses, I think as you've seen from the boss boss video earlier on this video, right? So you can start with voltaic mark and then basically just fire your plasma blast to quickly burst down the boss HP. So the reason why you want to use plasma blast at start, mainly because again plasma blast has a 2-second load time, and then when you do a 2-second load time, I think by the time the boss HP comes up, you can try to shoot it down already, and it also has an increased chance to apply shock, right? So after you use your plasma blast, the boss should ideally have a shock debuff, and then again it's just a matter of using the shock burst round just to burst the boss down. So I think after you use your shock burst round, just use your emergency reload to reload your shock burst round and then basically empty your second clip, and then basically at this point the boss should almost be dead. And I guess like if you want to apply the shock debuff again, you can either use your voltaic mark and then your galvanic shard to basically apply the shock debuff again, and then basically repeat the rotations of the shock burst round and then emergency reload. So that's it really. I think the build as of now is pretty optimized. I'm basically at that point where I'm almost reaching the end game system of the game, and I will try to aim to update the build next week once I've reached that stage, and then hopefully there aren't any major changes to the builds, and people can just continue with the current guide that I've made. But yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. Make sure you leave a like, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave it on a comment as well, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much.